Megan, you go ahead and let them all in. Good morning, everybody. Good morning, students. My name is Carrie Willigan. I'm the Assistant Dean for the School of Business Office of Career Services. Welcome to ProfessionalQuest, Supply Chain and Logistics. We have a wonderful panel here for you. It's moderated by Professor Moak, who is one of our supply chain professors. If you have any questions, please direct them to the chat and we will get them to the panelists. And thank you very much. And I'm going to turn it over right now to Professor Moak.
Hey, good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining. As was mentioned, I'm the adjunct that teaches several supply chain and operations classes, but we'll go ahead and jump right quickly into introducing our panel and then opening up for some questions. So just ask the panelists, maybe just a quick 30 seconds, your current role and then how that touches supply chain. Caitlin, do you want to start us off?
Sure. So good morning, everybody. My name is Caitlin Petras. I work at Amazon in supply chain. So I'm in Amazon Finance, so Amazon Logistics, which is all of the delivery trucks that you see on the street, the last mile of how we get you your packages. So hopefully you're getting your packages in 2 days, because that's kind of the work that I do at working on speed and customer promise in the finance sector. I have been working at Amazon for about 3 years. I was a college hire right after college, and I went to Illinois State University, and I majored in international business with a focus in finance.
Great, thank you, Caitlin. Taylor, kick it over to you for an introduction.
Thank you, Aaron. Taylor Wilkerson. I am a group lead with the MITRE Corporation, where I work with healthcare supply chain, primarily with federal government and the interface between federal government and industry. As you can imagine, healthcare supply chain has been pretty busy the past couple of years. But prior to that, I've been working with public sector supply chain for about 20 years. Undergraduate in mechanical engineering from Vanderbilt and an MBA from University of Maryland. But worked in everything from defense supply chain to USAID, global health, and everything in between. So looking forward to the discussion today.
Great, thank you, Taylor. Skip, turn over to you for an introduction.
Sure. Hi, I'm Skip West. I wear a couple of roles. I run a company called Max Innovations. We're a consumer products manufacturer distributor. And Caitlin, Amazon's our #1 customer. So we are the ones that ship that stuff into your warehouses and drop ship it to your customers in part. So it's a pleasure to meet you and a pleasure to meet Taylor. And thank you very much for hosting this thing, Aaron. We worry about supply chain every day, obviously bringing products in from Asia. Everybody's read about some of those issues and then sending it out to consumers and wholesalers and distributors all across the US. So I'll talk about that perspective. Side note, I'm an adjunct at Mason where I teach entrepreneurship as well.
Great, thank you, Skip. And Rafi, turn over to you for an introduction as well.
Thank you. Good morning, everybody. My name is Rafi Love. I'm a specialist leader with Deloitte AI and Cognitive. I am leading data science efforts in AI or whatever the current buzzword is, to the federal, mostly for the federal government and state and local. So anywhere from Kentucky, for example, or Indiana, all the way to USAID. USAID was mentioned around, we do some work around supply chain over there, and other analytics in other agencies. My background is in statistics and applied finance. I spend most of my day, half of the day is really about developing analytics and half of the day is really advising different clients on kind of a future state approach.
Okay, great. Thank you, Rafi. So we'll go ahead and start with the prepared questions while we're waiting students to submit some through the chat. I'll go ahead and just pick a panelist to answer the question, but if one of the panelists really wants to chime in, just please raise your hand and I'll go to you second to add in and contribute to the conversation. So we'll start in the same order with Caitlin. Curious what you see as what drew you to this supply chain and logistics field, or what do you see as kind of drawing in new hires, students that are coming in? What's the attraction to supply chain and operations?
Yeah, so personally, I kind of fell into supply chain. I was like any college student, applying to as many jobs as I could while I was in class, and my professors would say the name of a company, and I would be online and I would be applying. I guess why I kind of stayed in this field and why I like it is, and what would attract people is I really like solving problems. I like solving complex problems. And I think supply chain has a lot of complexities in it, and there's a lot of room for improvement on how to make efficiencies. And so I like the way that it makes your brain work when you have to get something from point A to point B in the most cost-effective, efficient, sustainable way. It just, you work with a lot of teams and cross collaboration, and you have to work on your communication skills to get to deliver, the result of whatever project you're working on. And so I think for me, the big attractiveness of like supply chain is problem solving.
Great, very good. Any of the other panelists want to add on to that?
I'll jump in there. It's funny because my job is running a small business, but I would have never said that supply chain would be a big chunk of my job. It has become a very, very important job for a couple of reasons. One, Amazon has sort of set the bar of, hey, everything's got to get delivered immediately and quickly and perfectly, and they do an amazing job of it. So, that raises the bar for everybody out there. So, it's become really, really important that we run those operations incredibly well. Orders go in by a certain time, they go out the same day. And then, of course, nowadays, the whole logistics, supply chain, we do our manufacturing in Asia. I'm sure everyone's read about all the delays and problems in getting product and goods and cost and all that. It's a really, really critical piece of making a business successful if you've got products. So really, really important. And I kind of didn't expect to be a major piece of my job, but it is an important piece and fun piece.
Very good. Thank you, Skip.
I mean, I would tag on to what Caitlin and Skip said. When I went back to business school after working as an engineer for several years, I really wanted to stay connected to sort of that tactical side of business, that, the actual production and moving of stuff. And really the options were either to go into operations management or supply chain. And the more I learned about supply chain, it's that, supply chain is what connects businesses together. It's what connects businesses to the customers. So it really struck me as it's sort of the core element of business is how do you get stuff to the customers? And, as Caitlin said, that brings with it a lot of complexity, a lot of sort of systems engineering, systems dynamics, problem solving. And for me, you're rarely working on the same thing day after day. It's a different problem, different puzzle to solve every day. And that's what makes it interesting for me.
Yeah, very good. I think it's interesting. We're kind of alluding to a lot of the problems that we're trying to solve. Not only are they dynamic and they change day to day, but most of what we do, there's not necessarily a right answer. We're always kind of working with trade-offs, and that's something that can be fun and challenging in its own right. So thank you for that. Rock, I'd like to turn over to you for a slightly different question. Kind of focusing on the audience, which is students that are potentially looking at supply chain and logistics careers today. What do you see as some of the key competencies or maybe classes that students want to be interested in to kind of help facilitate or set them up for success within a supply chain or logistics profession?
First thing comes to mind is any sort of capability around optimization. So any sort of some of it is business, some of it is statistics, coding if you can, any sort of a capability around optimization. It's kind of where we're going next. Anywhere from decision making, analytics on where your bottlenecks might be, anywhere to agent-based simulation, sort of like how do I flow traffic around the city using agent-based simulation? Think like gaming, but for supply chain. So that's the first thing. If you have the capability, the math, the coding, etc., you automatically, at least in my view, you're going to be on the top of the pile. So that's the first thing that comes to mind. The second thing that comes to mind around skills and items that we are interested in is really the ability to go through a lot of data, the ability to really transform data to insight. And again, I'm a little bit biased over here, I should say, because I am looking at it from that perspective, but the ability to really sift through a lot of data and really understand the patterns. Now you can solve problem. Now you can understand like where's your bottleneck, where is your, if you want to do smart factories or all of those kind of elements, if you can really get all the sensor data and from that understand, where's your anomalies, that kind of thing. That is a really great skill that is really in demand, not just in supply chain, in general as well.
Very good. Yeah, thank you, Rafi. And I think one of the things that's interesting about our panel is a lot of unique backgrounds and unique roles in supply chain. Any of the other panelists, anything that you would like to highlight for the students as well, or these are some of the skills that you might want to focus on developing with your remaining time or school, or some of the classes you might be interested in taking to help facilitate that success in supply chain roles?
Yeah, I'll jump in here. And I think all of those classes are fantastic, but really working on like your classes, your experiences outside of your classes, and working on communication and working on having tough conversations and brave conversations with the clubs that you're in, or if you see different kind of processes that you want to put in place. I think preparing now and like having that ability to get stuff done with other clubs and classes and like your classes outside of classes, I guess. And also another note, like everything can be taught. So as long as you're willing to learn and you're a good learner and you're coachable, I think like a lot of things can be taught. So take those classes, but don't be afraid to apply to jobs if you haven't had like the one coding class. But if you have the opportunity to prepare, then prepare.
Great, thank you, Caitlin. Taylor, Skip, anything else to add to that before we move forward?
I think Caitlin and Rafi covered it pretty well. I mean, it is a lot of the analytics and certainly the communication skills. I mean, when I think of supply chain, you're often trying to convince marketing or transportation or even other companies to do something to improve efficiency. And you need to go beyond just putting numbers in front of them. You need to be able to communicate the value to everyone and the benefits of that. So communication is a big piece of it.
Yeah, thanks for that. And I think that's important to emphasize, right, is the supply chain profession has this mixture of kind of what we call like harder technical skills with some of the soft communication and relationship management skills as well. So there's a lot of opportunity to, to kind of grow yourself and those different pillars to be successful here. Let's take that same kind of theme and pivot. So moving a little bit away from school to internships, entry level jobs. Hoping you guys can, and I'll start with Skip. What do you see as entry level roles, internships that might be available that students might want to look at when they're thinking about supply chain and logistics types opportunities?
Supply chain is such a big area. I can only speak for my little world, but I would strongly encourage students, if you have interest in this, go do it. I think one of the most important things I did when I was in college is I did some internships, did some externships, worked for different companies. One of them I realized I don't want to do that. One of them I realized I do want to do this. And that's really, really important. So get out there, get some practical experience, get your hands dirty. And also, I think it's really kind of cool if you can, as a student, kind of learn all the different aspects of it. Whether that means, go off and go with the driver and make deliveries and understand what that means to, doing all the analytics and the programming to make that whole supply chain work. So I'd say get your hands dirty, get some experience, get out there and learn about it. And the only way to do it is get involved. Don't have to make money, just get some experience and find out if that's what you really want.
Great, thank you, Skip. And so Rafi,
I would like to add over here is like, don't look at it as I'm looking for a supply chain internship or supply chain job. And nobody told me that I'm going to do supply chain in global medicine distribution. Like that was not the job description. But it's sort of like it can be hidden in other things. So make sure that you cast wide enough net. Either again, coming from either in analytics that we do smart factories, or you're doing it from a strategy around supply chain. So there's a lot of places where it's almost like hidden gem within the organization. Although obviously from Deloitte perspective, we have a whole offering on a supply chain, but it is exist in other locations. So make sure that when you're casting in your net, you're not looking for specifically for that.
Great, thank you, Rafi. Caitlin Taylor also, working for very large organizations, I assume have a mixture of internships and entry-level jobs that are in supply chain and logistics. What advice would you offer to students on I guess some type of mixture, how to find those jobs, how to apply for them, what they kind of look like within your organizations?
Yeah, I can speak for Amazon here. We are always hiring. We always have jobs. So the best advice I can give for you is apply yesterday. So get your resume, always have your resume kind of done up. And if it's not done, do it today and just submit applications. The only way that you're going to get some traction, and then network on LinkedIn.
Great, thank you, Caitlin. And Taylor?
Yeah, I think, Rafi, I think you brought up a good point that for the people I know working in supply chain, there's no like sort of single path everyone took to get to that point. It's not like some other finance where it's really established that here's how you get into finance. It's I started out in environmental engineering and worked my way over to supply chain. I know people who started off in the analytics side or in information systems and just got specialized into supply chain information systems. People who came over from marketing. So I think really and Skip, I think you said as well, try something out. Whatever you think is going to be of interest to you now, try it out. Get a job in that area, and don't be afraid to after a few years say, this isn't really what I wanted. Let me see what I can do to move to a different area of business or something different. But there's really no sort of set path. There's a lot of different ways to get to a career in supply chain.
Great, thank you, Taylor. Skip, gonna pivot to you real quick for a student question specific to entrepreneurship. Kind of looking for two general topics. How much time did you spend kind of getting ready to launch a new entity? And then what were some of the key steps you did before doing that you think contributed to your success?
Sure, great question. You definitely want to do a lot of things. You got to prove that you can do the business. You want to understand the operations, but most importantly, you want to understand that there's a market for whatever you're going to do. Because obviously, if you're going to start a business, make sure you've got customers lined up, people that are going to buy your product or service. There are a lot of ways of testing that out. There's some great resources at George Mason in the business school. There's a Center for Entrepreneurship. There's some great courses and resources that you could take. But at some point, if you want to be an entrepreneur, you literally have to, stand on the cliff, take that breath, and jump into the water and figure out if you can swim or not. But hopefully you can plan it out beforehand so that you can make sure that you're successful. But I would, as a general rule, prove there's a market, prove you've got the product, prove you can do the operations, and prove you can make money, and then get into it in a big way.
Great, thank you, Skip. So kind of pivoting back to thinking about some of these entry-level positions. Taylor, start with you on this question. Realizing there's different roles, and we've talked about that, and it's not necessarily everything's just called supply chain associate. What do most of your new hires or junior employees, what does a day-to-day or kind of a work week look like for them?
Yeah, so that's a great question. So at MITRE, most of what we're doing is very similar to consulting services. We're helping our sponsors and our clients to solve specific problems. So, day-to-day activities really tend to focus in on doing research, doing analysis, solving or answering the questions that are going to get to that, to solving that problem. And one of the things we like to do with new hires is let people stretch as far as they want to stretch. So we try to get people to a point where they're presenting things to clients very quickly, where they're helping to develop recommendations, develop products, et cetera. But a lot of our work focuses on that sort of core analysis, project management type of activity.
Thank you, Taylor. Caitlin, shift over to you. Much more of a ongoing operations role as opposed to the consulting side. Similar question. What is an entry-level employee doing on a day-to-day or kind of weekly basis within Amazon in your division?
Yeah, so honestly, like very similar. We're not consulting, but we're entry-level treated kind of like consultants, except we don't have clients. Your direct business partners and your team are your clients. So we have so many different areas that can be approved at Amazon in the supply chain. So within the fulfillment centers, within the transportation network, getting the packages in the truck to the next hub, and then for them to split it up then the next hub, and doing it in a timely manner so we can get customers or packages in 2 days or quicker. So I think a lot of it's so complex. So a lot of entry-level jobs are spent learning. We really value learning like kind of on the fly and in person. So we do a lot of like field training and going into the operation and picking items and packaging items and like going on ride-alongs in the delivery truck, so you can really understand the operation, like pick out inefficiencies in the operation, and then kind of fix the operation in the supply chain and work on, maybe move this part here or plan this part differently. So it's interesting because at Amazon, you're given a lot of responsibility from day one. And so you have the support of your managers and your team, but I think a lot of our entry-level employees are spending time learning, researching, doing analytics, pulling data, learning to pull data, learning to organize data, and then connecting the business, like the operation, the supply chain, the physical world with the virtual data world, and like connecting it and then telling a story. So I think the first 2 years of your career at Amazon are figuring out how to tell a story with in-person, real life stuff and data, and then create recommendations for your business partners for that.
Great, thank you, Caitlin. Rafa, I'll ask you the same question. Deloitte, very large organization. You bring in a lot of entry-level professionals and some, in this market too. What do you kind of see as that day-to-day role? And I guess maybe add to that, what is the value that an entry-level employee can bring to the organization? What should they kind of be focused on to make sure those first steps are successful joining a firm like Deloitte?
So, well, Deloitte is a very large organization and we do a lot of things. But I would actually jump something that was mentioned earlier, communication. Ability to have a crisp, to the point communication. It's almost like there's a little art to it. The ability to deliver that message is really important. That is something that we really work with our junior practitioner to crystallize over for the first couple of years. There's really no particular operation on a day, but the junior practitioner really get to learn a lot on the job around the business of their client, around how we approach different problems, and then how do we try to help the client solve, as Taylor mentioned, a particular problem and or transformation or analytics. So sometimes the problem is not defined. I want to get somewhere. How do I get there? Any particular day will be included from a no different than what Caitlin mentioned. Data analysis, collecting data either through structured, unstructured, or interviews, anywhere to crystallize that, or really transforming that into, okay, what is the message that the client is trying to deliver to us? And now how that's really, and then working with your leadership, your manager, your senior manager, to really how that support the overall delivery, either by a recommendation, as was mentioned, not as different than that, or into what are the actions that we propose one should take. I should mention that, and this is something that I really like. Again, I'm representing Deloitte, but it's similar in other firms, other consulting firms as well. A lot of really depends on you, is what you can do, and essentially it's I don't want to say you're an army of one, because you have a support system, really much of a teaming organization. But you bring your A game, you really can advance really, really far, really, really fast. I will present an example. I have one of my consultants actually joined the firm directly from college, and really applied himself, and really the ability to communicate clearly, go through a lot of data. He's getting to the point that he's presenting an analysis that he's done to an SES level, kind of like one of the highest level in a federal agency on the operation side. And really the ability to do that, because he showed that he can, then all those opportunities really coming in. So if you can, if it's sort of like you ask, you shall receive kind of thing. So be prepared to come in, and if you really want to move forward fast, be ready to prepare to bring it on. But again, communication, the ability to go through a lot of data, and really the ability to transform conversation, data, interviews into a crystallized 3 bullet points kind of thing will go a long way.
Great, thank you, Rafi. Skip, gonna ask you the same question, but on a slightly different tech context. Having more questions about entrepreneurship from the students. If you could take a student and say, hey, I'm gonna skip working for a professional organization, I'm gonna go right into entrepreneurship. What are the skills I should focus on while I'm still in school to help me be successful in those endeavors?
Oh, okay. Thanks, Aaron. Skill set to be a successful entrepreneur. You obviously have to have a good idea. You really have to have passion and determination. So much of being a successful entrepreneur, I think, Aaron, you also have your own business, if I read your bio right, so you might want to add on to this, is you've got to be willing to drive it forward. You're going to hit brick walls. You're going to have to get over, under, around them. You're going to have to figure out ways to do things. So just to use a supply chain example, we do our manufacturing in Asia. We bring our goods in here. We take care of distribution. Well, right now, there are a lot of supply chain hiccups. A few years ago, there were the tariffs on Chinese goods. You've got to figure out, how are you going to handle those issues? How are you going to get around them? How are you going to still be successful? So in terms of sort of skill set, I would tell you determination is important. I will tell you sales and marketing is important. You really do have to have those customers lined up and keep those customers, whoever they are going to be. I would also say, you've got to have a business model that works. You've got to be able to make some money. But most importantly, this is going to be your life. So you got to enjoy it. You've got to really be doing something that you love, that you care about, because your passion gets translated into the success of the business. And Aaron, you may want to add to that a little bit, since you also are an entrepreneur.
Yeah. Thanks, Skip. Yeah, I obviously agree with everything that Skip said. I would say, so I think about 6 years now into my entrepreneurship journey, and worked for very large organizations before that. I would think the one thing that carries over that we mentioned on is you've got to have some of those technical skill sets. You've got to be able to read a balance sheet. You've got to be able to do pricing analysis, those types of things. But then you've also got to have the soft skills. You've got to be able to build an organization, manage relationships. You've got to be able to recruit and retain talent. So you've got to kind of make sure that you're balanced in both sides. There, you can't. I think as a particularly kind of starter owner operator, you can't be too siloed into one area of your business. You've got to be able to touch and understand a little bit of everything. But thank you for that. So
yeah, I would add that last point, kind of understanding everything. And I think this is actually relevant for the whole audience is, you know, even though you may be supply chain focused, you really do have to know how all the pieces fit together, you know, the IT pieces or the financial pieces or the sales and marketing pieces, because it really is the integration of everything. And at least an understanding, even if you're not really great at those other areas, is important.
Yep, absolutely. Thank you, Skip. So interesting enough, we have a couple questions about trends and things that we see within the supply chain market, supply chain industry. And we also have some questions about COVID-19 and the pandemic. And I would assume that those are highly correlated for us supply chain professionals. So probably just go around the panel and everyone kind of see how has the current pandemic impacted your business? How is supply chain operations being valued to managing the disruption? And then the second part of that question would be, do you see kind of long-term trends in the type of employees, type of skill sets that you're bringing in this new environment? So Caitlin, I'll put you on the spot here to put about that. I think most of us are still getting our packages, but probably not without a lot of work behind the scenes to
yeah, that's a loaded question. So how was Amazon affected by COVID? We're doing great. Everybody's ordering stuff online. From the consumer side, so we are like sales have went up extraordinarily, like they continue to. But then how does that affect the operation? How does that affect my job? Everything got a lot harder. We were talking about like, how do you recruit and maintain relationships and like employees? And I think that got even harder during the pandemic because while everybody was going remote, like our operations, our warehouses are like people boots on the ground that are responsible for getting everybody like their items, packing their items, sorting the items, you know, transporting from location A to B, like that got a whole lot more complex. Making sure they're safe got a whole lot more complex. And I'm specifically in finance and in like supply chain finance. And so it got a whole lot more expensive, which is not a problem when it comes to safety, but I think figuring out how to manage that and how to find the right balance was specific for my job and how COVID changed it. So how do we make sure that we have all of the materials, the safety supplies that we need? How do we, you know, our volume went up, we're delivering a lot more packages. Like, how do we make sure that we're still delivering for our customers while also, you know, not like over indexing on like our employees in the warehouse? How do we make sure that we, you know, have enough line hauls, like enough semi trucks to get from point A to point B? And so stuff just got a whole lot larger and a whole lot tighter to run, just because, you know, in the world's watching Amazon, so kind of how we pave the way, like what we do is watched. So it just got a whole lot like tighter and more focus, and you have to have a little bit higher standards when you do everything and trying to deliver the packages for our customers.
Great. Well, I think we're all very happy that we're still getting our packages. So thanks, Caitlin, for the effort there. Taylor, gonna shift to you. Same question. You're kind of in the center of the storm on this. You're dealing with supply chains that have been heavily disrupted, but also focus on health systems that have had incredible variability in their typical demand kind of pieces there. What have you seen in the short term, and what do you think is some of the long-term lasting impact of what we've been through in the last year and a half?
Yeah, I think definitely the past year and a half has been, we'll say, a little bit chaotic for healthcare supply chain. It's been, you know, you take any industry and imagine this huge increase and shift in demand, and what that does to the entire industry. Combine that with some of the things, Caitlin mentioned of, people working remotely and transportation being constrained from Asia. It's been an interesting year and a half, and a lot of, for me, a lot of fun problems to solve, but also a lot of work. One of the things we did at MITRE is we stood up a coalition, ended up being about 1,200 companies working together on COVID response issues. So I was leading our supply chain efforts under that, and working at, every week had a meeting with folks from Cardinal Health and Mayo Clinic and people all across the supply chain to understand where the problems were, how to solve them. And as I think it goes back to a lot of the discussions we had earlier of what supply chain is about. It's about solving these complex problems and getting people into a room, understanding priorities and how we're going to work together to fix them within the constraints that the rest of the world has put on us. I think looking ahead, I see this is potentially going to change some of how health systems operate and how they make decisions away from sort of the just-in-time sort of paradigm of leaning out inventory to more preparedness and really looking at what is the objective of a healthcare system, especially during a response action or a health emergency. So I see a lot more investment in the technologies that we've discovered along the way or that have been implemented to improve collaboration, improve visibility. I see a lot more emphasis on risk management and how to prepare better for these types of disruptions. And I think overall it'll make the healthcare supply chain stronger, but it's still going to be a lot of work as we continue to recover from what's been a huge disruption to all aspects of healthcare operations.
Great, thank you, Taylor. Rafi, actually kind of the same thing. I'm sure you've had a lot of clients that want a lot of quick answers and how they should respond to the COVID and pandemic, both kind of short term and then also looking at what are maybe long-term or systemic changes. What have you noticed? Where do you think we're going as a supply chain industry?
So I think that for me, and again, looking at it from an analytics side, the impact of COVID, again, transportation, we talk about the supply chain aspect of that, and delivery, yes, but it's really turned 10 years into, 2 months kind of accelerator in my world. I really want to touch on 3 points, really. The first of all is the importance of good data. If before I can pick up the phone, I can talk to people, it's no longer the case. It's almost like forget about all the predictive analytics, AI or something like that. Is my data here and is it good? Is it clean? Can I use it? That is the world of data management really and governance really exploded. Good data is critical. The second component is we see a lot of companies really collecting and using and asking how to use sensor data, simulation, and prediction. The whole world of predictive analysis within supply chain and other worlds, other areas as well. Getting sensor data from GPS data to smart factories where I know exactly what's happening every time at every moment. And again, going back to the importance of good data. Agent-based simulation, I really see that as the next generation of what-if scenarios. Instead of a kind of like a projection, think about like gaming, like if I just let loose a city on my computer simulation, what will happen? So the importance of those prediction and those analytics really became a lot more important. If before that, it was sort of like we were sitting on the side, now we're at the forefront of like, that's the important. And the last thing, which I think is critical for supply chain world is really the ability to identify where is the friction in the system and then removing it. And I'm talking by tech or process or like making at least anything that you can remove in the friction, you should do. Anywhere from Mayo Clinic was mentioned. Can we transform doctor notes to a speech to text? So, and then the system can identify automatically what is the medication and where's the next appointment needs to be, and automatically do that. All the big players are working on that, and there's a lot of work around that. So let's make things faster so we can go do some other things. All the way to HR. How do I get a person from position A to a different to do something else? How do I move a widget from A to B without all the paperwork, for example? So frictionless system becomes a lot more important.
Great, thank you, Rafi. And Skip, I can't imagine, being a product-based entrepreneur, some of the challenges you've dealt with, the pandemic, delays, shortages, and increased costs, anything like that. Kind of just give us, high level what you've seen, how you've stayed resilient, and how you're focusing on staying resilient in the future.
Sure, thank you, Aaron. It's kind of a funny world because my former life before my current company, I go back in the 1980s, 1990s, we were a manufacturer in the US doing consumer electronics. And my current company, we do all our manufacturing in Asia. And what's really interesting now is that US manufacturing is kind of coming back, in part because of supply chain and tariffs and all the issues that we're talking about. There's been a huge trend for many, many years to look at global supply chains, and it's still there, obviously, but that trend is starting to change a little bit. Kind of funny also, we are in our old world, we used to sort of bring products in, we would distribute them to the big guys, send them into Amazon's warehouse, and they would take care of all the rest. Well, literally about 10 years ago, we got into the drop ship world, which means you ordered it on Amazon, you ordered it at HomeDepot.com or Lowe's.com or wherever else you bought it, and we would ship it direct to the consumer. Turned out to be a really good move business-wise, strategically, because the world is definitely moving into that, direct to the consumer from the manufacturer, and we've been able to ride that wave. Been kind of interesting and been very, very helpful. Pandemic, how has that impacted us? It's funny, we run a distribution business. We've got to be shipping out product every day. And if we don't, we make no sales. So we had to refigure our whole operation to make sure we had all the safety protocols, make sure everybody was doing health checks, make sure after vaccinations occurred, everybody got vaccinated, all those kind of things to be able to run a successful operation. We've had people working remotely. Remote doesn't work quite as well, in our mind, just because of you lose the culture, you lose that water cooler impact, but that's also the world we're in. For the future, I don't know. It's going to be interesting. The hiccups that we're having right now, are they all transitory? Or are they going to be long-term? We really don't know, but it's some really, really interesting challenges and a really interesting future. But I will say that it's proven. I mean, e-commerce, supply chain, all that has really been absolutely critical to our success and to many businesses' success in the pandemic.
Great, thank you, Skip. Yeah, I imagine there's a lot of just one day at a time and deal with the problems that are in front of you, and then also try to balance that with getting ready for the problems that might be coming down the pipeline. So
exactly.
Insight. We'll pivot now. Kind of a fun question as a little bit of a break before we dive back into the material, and I'll go first to let the other panelists think about an answer. But I'm a student. I want to learn about supply chain. Maybe not necessarily taking class. Is there a book I can read? Is there a website I can go to kind of get educated on my own time? I'll start with two from my side, and then let any other panelists chime in. There was a book that came out, I believe, earlier this year called "Trade is Not a Four-Letter Word." It's definitely an economic book, proponent of free trade, but a lot of the explanation, it'll just explain how international trade works and some of the extent that our supply chains exist on, and may give a little bit more insight into just how complex supply chains are. So I think that's worth the read. It's kind of quick. Additionally, I would say on a continuing basis, always a huge advocate of the magazine, The Economist. No one has time to read every magazine or every article, nor should you. But if you go through there, you can search for things like supply chain, operations, trade in general, and you'll find some good articles. that explain how both countries and organizations and businesses are managing supply chain. And just you see some of the problems they're dealing with, and you kind of understand what's underneath the hood there a little bit. By way of either hand or just jumping in, does any of the other panelists want to throw out, something that a book or a site that a student can go to learn more about supply chain?
Yeah, I'll jump in there. And this is really Caitlin. I don't know if this is still done, but one of the coolest things we did, since Amazon's our #1 customer, we actually did a tour of one of your DCs back before COVID, when you guys were still offering tours. I think right now the tours are all virtual, that you do have virtual tours of your DC, but I would tell you, if you're interested in supply chain and you're interested in products, take a tour of an Amazon DC or look at the virtual tour and dive into that. It is fascinating. It's amazing. I don't know how they do it, how you all do it, Caitlin. My hat's off to you all.
I don't know how
But
we do
it's
it. Every
incredible.
time I spent a year and a half in our fulfillment centers, and how we get packages from A to B is beyond me, but it works. It comes together.
Yeah. So anyway, I would encourage, if there's a virtual tour or a physical tour, again, the students should take advantage of that. It's a great learning thing. So.
Great, thank you, Skip. Any of the other panelists, something someone can read, pay attention to, kind of self-educate on supply chain?
Yeah, I think for me, there's a couple of things to look at. One, there are the associations like Association for Supply Chain Management, Council for Supply Chain Management Professionals, that do a lot of really good webinars that dive into these topics. And there are also a couple of really good podcasts around supply chain. There's Supply Chain Now. ASCM again has a good supply chain podcast. Supply Chain Rebels is one that talks a lot more about sustainability and the future of supply chain. So there's a lot of things like that where they bring in business leaders, they bring in supply chain leaders and innovators to talk about what they're doing and how they're approaching supply chain transformation, supply chain problems. I find that a really good resource to follow. And then, I'm always been pretty passionate about risk management, and Yossi Sheffi from MIT keeps putting out book after book that is each one is just incredible and incredibly insightful about how resilient supply chains allow companies to survive and to beat competitors. So I'd strongly recommend checking out some of his books.
Great, thank you, Taylor.
Yeah.
So I'll go
I
ahead.
was just gonna say, I have a different piece of advice too here. Current events, like just outside of books, keep up with current events, and whether that's, following a couple companies or companies that that you study in your textbooks or case studies like on LinkedIn, and then follow the news articles that they post is a good way. Set Google alerts for the same thing, like companies or keywords that you're interested in. I think that helps you stay up to date on kind of just what's going on in the world in the supply chain. A little less more frequent and at smaller quantities throughout the day, I'd say.
I would like to add something a little bit different than the other panelists. Obviously, I think you should all go learn data and analytics and as it's applied, but I'm biased. But I recommend so yes, supply chain, but I will also encourage all of you to kind of try always to think about what's next. There was a book that was published about a year ago called Post-Corona by Professor Galloway. It's some predictions are happening, some not, but it's an interesting way of how to think about what happens after crisis, and kind of like what somebody like Professor Galloway thinks how things might change, and then you think how that's going to impact what you're doing. It's a very interesting a concept of crisis, how to respond to a crisis and how the world will change post the crisis. So it's an interesting kind of, it's something else to add to your repertoire as far as how do you think about the world in the context of business.
Very good. Thank you, Rafi. So in the last couple of minutes here, I'd like to go to each one of the 4 panelists, and let's go back to the lens of students that are looking to apply to our organizations for entry-level jobs. They're going to be likely applying and potentially interviewing in a virtual or remote environment. So the 2 questions would be, what do they need to put or highlight on their resume as someone that's leaving school, that's gonna garner interest from you as a recruiter? And then additionally, what are tips that you've seen as an interviewer or hirer to help facilitate that kind of remote hiring process, remote interview, things like that? What have candidates done well in that environment? I'll kind of let whoever wants to go first dive in on this one.
I'll give you some general tips that I still take for myself. What to highlight on a resume. Google the job description, go to the job description and like the preferred qualifications or what do you do in your day-to-day. It'll give you a description. Copy that and say, go back and look at the examples that you have and like write out a blurb or a bullet point of an example you have done in your past, in your experience, to satisfy that basic requirement. So if like the job, it's like you need to be able to, communicate with cross-functional business partners. Okay, like how have you go back and say, okay, well, I'm in this like fraternity or sorority and I'm on the leadership team and I had to communicate with, all the other VPs and we got X, Y, and Z done from me communicating with all of them. So I'll say that's one tip on creating your resume for jobs. 2, Google's your oyster, man. Like everything is on Google. Just Google like Amazon interview questions or Deloitte interview questions and prepare. Like that's the biggest advice I have for you. Google has everything. So prepare that way would be my general advice, but I'm sure these guys have some other advice for you.
So, I mean, I can speak about this for the next hour, but to be completely honest, I would like to point out, just because where we are, there's a difference between commercial resume and federal resume. If you're applying for a resume for federal positions, you should obviously apply to Deloitte. But if that doesn't happen, then a federal resume require, as Caitlin mentioned, exactly to respond to the particulars of the position. I would encourage everybody to really highlight a technical capability. Again, you don't have to like do computer vision, but if you really a wizard in Excel or something like that, that should come out. If there's something unique, I don't know, you won a gold medal in a swim competition nationally, like that should come out. And then the final piece is that be ready to speak, whatever you put on your resume, be ready to speak to. Nothing is if you put something and then we ask you about it and say, oh, well, I was part of the project, but somebody else actually did that thing, so you don't actually know how to do that. That's an issue. So you can still put it. I participate a part of the team. That's important, but that's the point that you're trying. Be ready to speak to what you put on there.
Great, thank you, Rafi.
Taylor? Yeah, I think both Caitlin and Rafi brought this up, but tailor your resume, right? Don't just say I have a resume. I'm going to send that same resume to every job I apply for. Learn about the company and tailor your resume to what that company is looking for. Learn about the company's culture and tailor that resume to that company's culture. For example, MITRE really values teamwork and collaboration. How can you bring that out in your resume along with the other skills? And I think that's just a key element to sort of any job search. In terms of the interviewing skills, I'll share a disaster I had with an interviewee, and that is, you're online. Be professional, be aware of your background. Talk to somebody who had an unmade bed and half full liquor bottles in their background. Great person, but it sends the wrong message. But I think also, to both what Rafi and Caitlin said, look at what skills the company's looking for and have a story to explain those skills. Don't just say, oh, I took a class on machine learning and used R and this and that. Have a story and be able to tailor that story to specific questions. But they're going to ask, tell me about a time where you had a difficult team situation and how you overcame that. Think about something you've done. As Caitlin said, it doesn't have to be a work situation. It can be a fraternity or sorority or other club situation. It can be a class situation. But think about, what is that story you want to tell where you've been successful in a difficult situation, where you've thought about something differently and really excelled? What's that handful of stories you want to be able to tell, and have those ready to go? Practice them. Understand what is the message you want to tell through those. I think that's, for me, I've seen people really successful with that approach.
Great, thank you, Taylor. And Skip, you want to close this out with what it's like recruiting and interviewing at a smaller organization and what you kind of focus on?
Sure. I would add just a couple of quick, there's some great comments in there. And one thing that I do want to stress is be prepared. Go in there, Google the person who you're talking to, know a little bit about them, know the company, have some questions, so you go into an interview and you're willing to ask, you've done some homework, you've proven that you're responsible, and also follow up afterwards is really important as well. Most people don't do that, but I would add a little more proactivity to it as well, because I think, look at your passions, look at what you're good at, look at what you want to do, and then try and find the people out there that might be relevant. So there's one student who already kind of linked into me, who's on this seminar. I won't call her out by name, but if that's interesting, reach out, find somebody who's doing what you want to do or you want to learn from and talk to. Don't be afraid to do informational interviews as well. Go out there and find people that might be able to tell you about supply chain. Everybody may not have a job, but they're more than willing to say, hey, I'm in this field, I can share what I do, you can learn from them, and if you connect, great, you get a job. Maybe do an internship. That's another great way to get a job and come out with something that you want. For us, we're looking for both soft and hard skills. So it's always kind of interesting, and we really are looking for people that are bright and talented that can learn. I can't teach you to be bright and talented if you're not. I can teach you my business, if you want to learn. So I'll stop there. This has been a lot of fun. Thank you.
No, thanks, Skip. And I think we're at 11 o'clock. So just close out with thank you for the panelists for donating your time and speaking with the students today. I think that was great and very informative.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you. Really enjoyed it, Aaron.
Thank you all.